Good morning. We're going to call the session of the Election Law Committee to order. And the first bill is Senate Bill 382. And I will introduce it. It is relative to election recounts and audits. And we will call the first person who signed up on the sheet, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I suppose members of the committee. My name is Michael Bryan. I am with Party Strategies representing America Votes here today in support of this bill. What we actually have heard from the Secretary of State's office is that they have updated their procedures for recounts after last year. I think we all remember the events surrounding sort of Manchester Ward 6 and how it unfolded. From a perspective of just making sure that folks have confidence in the recount system, we thought it would be important to produce something that I sort of relate to like a election procedure manual, but for recounts, so that the public understands what's happening and how it's going to happen, so that everyone understands sort of the recount procedures, and we make sure that hopefully we don't have a repeat of what happened in Manchester Ward 6 last year. In addition, the other piece of this bill is just to make sure that recounts and audits happen at separate times. Again, this is something that I've been told actually is already going to happen, which is great. I think last year when the audits started happening at the same time as the recounts and people weren't, sort of just popped up, having them at separate times is probably a good best practice so that folks can follow who want to follow. But again, I want to thank the Secretary's office for, seems like already started to take those steps. Just want to make sure the public understands and can see it, because I think transparency leads to confidence, which is something I know that their office cares about and that we care about as well. So thank you for your time.
Questions? Yes, I have a question. You mentioned Manchester Ward 6 and in a less than flattering way, but you haven't said what happened in Manchester Ward 6 that caused any of the problem. So nobody that's listening is going to have any idea of what you're talking about.
Sure, and I think when I prepared remarks, I thought that would come up before. But yeah, so I mean, essentially, if we remember from last year, there was a recount in Manchester Ward 6. When it was recounted, a stack of ballots were missed, and so the candidate who originally lost by, I don't remember the number of votes, I'm sure maybe Deputy Secretary does, but somewhere around 6 to 9, I think if I remember correctly, ended up winning. And then there needed to be a second recount, which hadn't happened before. There was a whole bunch of stuff in the middle there with lawsuits and other things. I think ideally, obviously, what we would like to see here is to make sure that all the ballots are counted, that we have a total number of ballots going in, that those total number of ballots match once the recount is finished, so that we know we've counted them all, and we know that the results that we're getting on the recount are correct, and we don't end up questioning the validity of a recount. Certainly anyone who's been a part of these, and I've been a part of many, knows they can be a bit chaotic and frantic. Lots of them go on at one time. We have to get them done, and I think that's fine. But again, I think just establishing some public procedures that they probably already have in place just for transparency is a good thing.
But I thought it was the Manchester City Charter that controlled the recounts in Manchester.
I'll defer here, but my impression on all recounts for state elections, which is what we're addressing here, get controlled by the Secretary of State and run by the Secretary of State.
Thank you. Since there's no other questions, I would like the Deputy Secretary of State, if she would like to comment about there's always a problem when we get into cities and charters and different things that they control things, and some of the state laws are not applicable to the cities because of the words that are in their charters. Any comment on any of that?
Thank you, Chair. Erin Hennessy, Deputy Secretary of State. I don't know the details about Manchester City Charter, but in regards to the election that was referenced for the state rep race, that would be the Secretary of State that would coordinate and hold that recount. In this case, there was not a second count. It was a court-ordered continuation of the count. So the Secretary of State is not authorized to hold a second recount unless court ordered to do so in this case.
Any comment on, there's lots of questions about
Yes.
the Nashua recount,
Nashua
which
recount.
was a city recount.
No, I'd have no comments on that because that would be a city recount. So any state election would be the Secretary of State's purview, and any local city, ward, town would be at the town level or
Okay.
city ward level.
Seeing no other questions?
I do
Thank
have some
you.
comments.
Okay.
Thank you. So I was hoping to hear from the sponsors on this bill what they meant by established separate times. As you may be aware, currently the Secretary of State's office will hold several different recounts at the same time, and those are continued until completed. So in some cases, there may be 8 different teams counting at the same time, and possibly when we were also doing the audits, there could have been 10 teams, and this would be the audits of the upper level races that were established in, the first audits happened in 2020. So I would like to know if separate means that each individual recount has to be held at its own time, meaning we cannot hold another recount at the same time. If that's the case, then I have concerns over the timing of things. The Constitution of New Hampshire, in Part 2, requires, Article 33 requires that the Secretary of State notify the people who have won their election, the state senators and the state representatives, 14 days before the first Wednesday in December, so that they have time to gather their things and come to Concord to be sworn in on the first Wednesday in December. As you may be aware, this passed in 2022, I said 2020 before, sorry, 2022. We had several recounts at the general election, and we met this deadline, but because of the number of recounts that we had, if we were to have to hold each recount at a separate time and do no other recounts at that same time, then we would not meet the constitutional 14-day deadline.
Your comments are noted. I can't discuss it because we're not in executive session, but I would have some comments on that myself.
Okay, and also as far as the policies and procedures, each candidate, when they are notified of a recount, whether they've requested it or one of their, the other candidates on the ballot has requested it, gets a description of what the recount will look like, and a specific time that their recount will start. Sometimes the times are extended because the recount before theirs, just like Senate hearings, didn't end timely. But in general, they were given the specific date and time of their recount.
I will, after your testimony, if you want to come back up after I hear from Senator Perkins Quokka.
Sure.
Then I will let you come back up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Senator Perkins Quokka, I did introduce the bill for you. There was a question from the Deputy Secretary of State, and you at least need to turn your mic on or go to the witness chair, whichever you choose. That she wants to know whether or not it is requiring no other recount happen at the same time, since we're talking about separate times. Did I state that fairly, Deputy Secretary?
Yes.
Good morning. I appreciate the question. I think that the intent here is that we just want to make sure any procedures or rules that have been developed internally at the Secretary of State's office are available publicly, just because it's important that everyone is able to feel trust in our electoral system. We know that the Secretary of State's office has been working hard on that, and that transparency, both in our rules and processes, is an important piece of that public trust. And so we want to make sure that everyone's able to sort of follow along from home, if you will, and just ensure that all of that information is available to the public. As to the Deputy Secretary's specific question, we want to address specifically that audits and recounts occur at different times because they are separate processes. Obviously, one is triggered by the vote outcome and the other is triggered by statute. And so just making sure that those are not conflated and don't occur simultaneously is an important goal. As to whether separate recounts can occur at the same time, it's a good question to think about. I'd probably defer to any other folks that want to testify on this, but we can.
Well, let me interrupt for just a second.
Please.
In the last general election,
Yep.
at the archives, there was probably up to 2, maybe 3 recounts that were going on the bottom floor. And then upstairs, there was at least one room that was dedicated towards the audits that were generated by recounts for the representative races. And I think at one point we may have even had another recount going on up there. Would that or would that not be acceptable per your bill?
I would think that would be fine. As well as establish separate times to hold any recounts and audits that may take place.
I'll let you think about it when we get to the executive session, because they will be interested in that, because if we don't run many recounts at the same time,
Sure.
then timeliness becomes an issue, which is part of what the Deputy Secretary talked about.
No, I appreciate drawing attention to the language and am open to having further conversation on that.
Okay. I'm all set with you.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions. Deputy Secretary, did you get the answer you wanted? Because it's probably, most of it's going to be deferred till we get to the executive session, or private conversation between you and the sponsor. All right. All right, and seeing no other comments, we'll close this public hearing. And just a minute, we'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 380. That being told, we have the prime sponsor for Senate Bill 380 before us, and if he would introduce himself and his bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. Senator Tim Lang from District 2, representing the Lakes Region area. I'm introducing Senate Bill 380. 380 is a pretty straightforward bill. It basically takes the primary and all the related dates and backs it up 90 days, for all intents and purposes, 3 months. So a September primary would be held in June. Filing, instead of being in June, would be in March. And then all the related laws and forms are adjusted in here to deal with that. The reason for this bill is about voter access to candidates. As you know now, in the given makeup, voters, given when you have a possible recount, have less than 60 days to decide who they're going to vote for in a general election ballot to vet the two parties. And so the idea of this bill is to give voters more time to get information about the candidates that are actually be voted on in November, rather than less than 60 days. That's a short version of the bill.
Questions? I have a question.
Sure, shoot.
RSA 658-2 is the appointment of inspectors of election. And right now, we have them appointed between May 15th and July 15th, which allows them to be trained before a September primary. I would think that you may want to look at that section also for a possible revision, and I'm sure there are other sections out there that we have had that, unless you
Give me that RSA one
go
more
find
time.
them, 658, and there's several parts in there that talk about inspectors of election, but 2 is where they were appointed, 658-2.
So not to throw Aaron under the bus over here, but I did work with the Secretary of State's office to try to get the relevant sections, and if we miss them, then again, it's a big change. So I'll work with them again to find out if there's anything else that might need an amendment to make this workable.
Again, the inspectors of election, for people who don't know, is the way that the two parties that got the most number of votes in the last election can ensure that they have people representing themselves on the election team at the election. Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Is there anyone in the audience that didn't sign up would like to speak now? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing.
44. Oh, thanks. Some busted windows across the street. It's going to be interesting watching that come down. Yeah.
We'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 445 FNA, and we have the prime sponsor who will introduce himself and the bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Senators. Dan Innes from Bradford, New Hampshire, representing District 7. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you today Senate Bill 445. This is a rather interesting bill that takes a pretty unique approach to a particular election in our state. And it's a discussion I had some years ago with folks and thought, well, this might be interesting to take a look at, to discuss, and maybe consider. So we bring this to you. And what it does essentially is create what we'd call a voter-owned election. And it establishes a commission to oversee what's called a voter-owned election. It's executive council races only. And basically what the voter-owned election fund would do is allow citizens to allocate their portion of the fund to particular candidates for executive council. One of the reasons we chose this race is because it's only 5 seats, and it's one that people typically don't pay much attention to. So conceivably, having some funds to allocate to candidates to help them to run would cause people to pay more attention. It limits individual contributions to $125 if the candidate participates. It also limits out-of-state contributions. The funding sources are noted in the bill: voluntary, unspent public contributions, interest, and perhaps a source determined by the commission, depending on how things develop. I'm sure, I believe, there are probably some folks here to testify following me, and they can answer questions. I'm happy to take a crack at any that you might have as well.
Questions from the committee? Certainly my concern is funding,
I understand.
that the impact statement on the back of the bill doesn't, I think, address everything that I would need it to address at some point. But that there's certainly a real possibility that administer this fund will take
A little bit of money.
increased employment in the Secretary of State's office, and therefore if donations come in that are limited to begin with, that we'll end up paying for it out of general funds, which is not where I want to go.
I understand.
Comment on that?
No comment. I understand your point. It makes sense.
Okay.
All right.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Dodge.
Good morning, Senators. Thank you for being here on this very snowy day. It's the last thing I and I
You
would
need
just,
to state your name and
I'm
your
sorry.
town.
Of course I did. It's right here. It says so. My name is Corinne Dodge, and I'm a voter in Derry, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I would, Senator Gray, like to say, as a voter and a taxpayer, that it is very important, and I would be very happy to have a portion of my tax money go towards getting a way for us people, constituents, to have a voice in this government. Over the past years, New Hampshire residents have seen 2 alarming and related spikes: prescription drug costs and opioid-related deaths. People are dying from overuse of opioids, but also from a scarcity of affordable drugs for some very common illnesses. We are inundated with opioid prescriptions in our community, but are unable to afford other life-saving medications. At the same time, the pharmaceutical industry continues to thrive with excessive profits, even at the expense of everyday people like ourselves. How can this be? When it comes to big money flooding into the hands of politicians, there is no bigger culprit than the pharmaceutical industry. Each year, pharma giants spend millions to promote candidates and laws that will protect profits, their profits. They leverage vast amounts of money to block laws that would check their ability to control drug prices or push opioid prescriptions. People are hurting from political inaction on drug policy. We, the constituents, the people, are demanding solutions, but the calls seem to get lost, never leading to any real action. Why would legislators so vehemently oppose a policy that nearly all Americans agree would help with the drug crisis? Why is nothing getting done on this? The answer is simple. I know the answer and you know the answer. It's money, big money running our elections. How can we expect politicians to act on the opioid crisis or the skyrocketing drug costs when they're essentially paid thousands of dollars not to do so? If we do not rein in lobbying and corporate campaign finances, contributions, we are placing our health in the hands of an industry built to profit, but not for me. For me and so many others around New Hampshire and the country, it's personal. Curbing corporate influence in politics isn't just about democracy. It's about being able to advocate for our families and our loved ones and to actually be heard, and I ask that you hear us today. Good news. New Hampshire has a solution. Senate Bill 445, the small donor voter-owned elections bill, you hold in your hands today. When you support this bill, you are supporting your constituents. SB 445 will serve to crack down on corporate donations from the pharmaceutical industry and other corporate lobbyists. Increase campaign fund transparency. I think we all know that transparency is what allows democracy to work. This bill would help. It would be a first step in helping to get transparency in our elections and give citizens a vote. And give citizens a voice with voter dollars. And it would ensure that we can hold our representatives for the Executive Council accountable in the coming session. Please fix our democracy and stand up for your constituents. Put your constituents' voices above wealthy corporate donors, please. Support SB 445, and thank you.
Questions?
I do have questions.
On the federal level and other election levels that have tried similar things, the only thing that's really happened is that these organizations have formed PACs and do independent expenditure, therefore leaving you right in the situation that you are right now. I understand, but how are you going to get around, with the language that's in this bill, people forming those federal PACs and spending the money for promoting a candidate that way?
There are very many ways for us to try to get our voices heard, and I certainly agree with you, but those super PACs are atrocious. However, we need a first step. I spent time in Seattle, Washington this summer with groups of people that have been working all over the country for this kind of legislation. I heard many different stories about this this kind of a system. We are proposing a very simple, small step, 5 executive counselors. We heard the problems when we tried to pass this last January, and so we've changed what was proposed last January. It's much more narrow now, and we need to do something different than what we are doing. I agree with you, those packs are horrible, but we need to work on many different
Just for the
areas.
record, I never said they were horrible, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's your own
I
opinion.
I think super PACs are horrible for me as a constituent, and I believe that it takes my voice away. But I'm sorry, I didn't say it. I put my
Are there additional,
intense passion in that.
are there additional questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Catherine?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Langell. I'm a 20-year-old voter from Concord. I'm speaking on behalf of Open Democracy. I have a collection of voices from Open Democracy's various constituents and members, I suppose, here in this packet I've presented to you. Please take your time in reading it and hearing the voices. But I'm going to choose to speak on behalf of Bradford E. Cook, a man from Manchester who has sent his voice in today.
Is his testimony in the packet?
Yes, yes, it is.
Then you can paraphrase it, but do not
That works.
read it.
That works for me. Essentially, what his testimony says and what everyone's testimony echoes is, let's pass this bill because it's important for voters to share their opinions and their voices, and to put ownership back in the voters' hands. I understand your concern with funding, I do. But what this bill does is gives it a shot and gives it a try in New Hampshire communities. With the executive council race being so small, in quote unquote small in terms of size, it would put the focus back on this race that is often overlooked by voters. I'm not gonna lie, until I started working and focusing on politics, I had no idea what the executive council does. Now I do, and I would love to focus on this race more. It would bring a significant focus back onto what voters are actually putting their vote towards. Essentially, Open Democracy members echo this sentiment and put this bill towards ought to pass in an effort to try, see what happens, and yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
testimony. There was one person who signed in opposition, did not wish to speak. Anyone else in the audience? Deputy Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Erin Hennessy, Deputy Secretary of State. I want to apologize to the committee. Our office did not get the fiscal note in time. I know this is the policy committee, but things overlap a little bit. I would like to bring to your attention the fiscal note for House Bill 324 from 2023. I believe, I was waiting for the testimony from the sponsor, but I believe our updated fiscal note, once submitted to the LBA's office, will be very similar to that one. So if you were making any decisions, I would just recommend to take a look at that as well.
Yeah, I don't know that I've received it.
I have not, sorry, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I have not submitted the fiscal note yet.
Oh, okay.
I was waiting to hear the testimony of the prime sponsor to see if there were any differences in the bill from last year that the House heard, House Bill 324, and I have not heard any.
Just as a point, how much of a staff position, the way the bill is written, do you anticipate that would be required to support this effort?
The onus of the bill would create a commission within the Secretary of State's department. attached to it. I imagine similar to the Ballot Law Commission. However, they would have to create a standalone system for the voters to deliver their, I want to use the correct word, secure online system for delivery of certificates for voters not wishing to receive their voter dollars in the mail. So they would have to create a system, and they would also have to mail the voter dollars if the person has not signed up for the system yet. So each mailing for all certificates would have to go out to all registered voters in the state.
And so my uninformed would say that that would be either a 1 FTE or 2 FTEs, full-time equivalents. Is that what FTE stands for in your department? Is that near what you're figuring?
I imagine the commission would need at least 2 full-time equivalents. They would have to either hire someone to create the system or to hire an outside firm to create the system, but then have internal staff to maintain the system. As well, to do the many mailings would be a different employee to do the administrative side of the commission.
Senator Murphy.
Good morning. You said there was another House bill that was identical last year?
I haven't been able to determine if it was exactly identical, but
At
it was.
first glance, it appears to be. Do you know what was the disposition of that bill? Was it ITL'd?
I believe it came out of the House committee, a 10-10 vote, but I don't recall what happened to it once it hit the floor.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Thank you. On a separate sheet, Max Abert.
Thank you very much. I didn't come in prepared to speak. I do support the concept of the bill, not the language itself, not the mechanism that they're proposing. I just wanted to let you know that we did in the House side, I believe last session or the session before, we did openly discuss the idea of having something like a Washington State style voter handout that's mailed out to everyone. But that we looked at the cost of that, and the cost estimates were pretty high, similar to this bill. So we then kind of moved on to the idea of for candidates having maybe something in the town report. Maybe if we change the time that the town report goes out, and we looked at other ideas like postcards, or maybe something when people went into the state primary, they could pick up a handout, and it would have, perhaps every candidate on the ballot would have a little blurb, 50 words or 100 words or something, and maybe a black and white picture on the side. Like I say, I like what they're trying to get at. Maybe this isn't workable as it is, but we did look at, I think it was in House election law, we looked at a lot of potential ideas for things that were cost effective. I remember what the Republicans didn't want to have was anything that would be an unfunded mandate down onto the towns that would increase costs. So that's why we're looking at the possibility of adding 2 or 3 pages to the town report for candidates. But those come out early in the year, so it would probably not be as effective as maybe a handout that you get with the state primary.
Since this only affects executive counselors right now, additional questions from the other senators? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. And I will close the public hearing, and we'll open the next public hearing, 446, just as soon as we're ready.
I am pinch hitter.
Oh, okay. Then I didn't understand that. We will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 446, and Senator Ennis couldn't be with us, so that we have someone else sitting in his stead to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Grant Bossy. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for the New Hampshire Senate, here to introduce Senate Bill 446 on behalf of Senator Dan Innes, the bill's prime sponsor. This bill would essentially allow candidates in an election, if they are in favor of more than one candidate, they can choose more than one candidate. I think this would have the most impact in a crowded primary field, where I've been in races that have 10, 11, 12 candidates on the ballot, and you have candidates fighting for lanes. Here's the conservative lane, here's the progressive lane, here's the moderate lane, and they're fighting with each other for that one vote that a voter gets to cast in any one race. This would say that if there are 3, 4 candidates that meet your criteria for what would be an exceptional representative, senator, governor, president, you can vote for all of them and then leave off the ones that you don't want. I think the aim of this bill, without having spoken to Senator Innes in great detail, is to avoid a candidate with a small but hardcore plurality of, in a really crowded field, you could see 15, 18% being the most any one candidate gets, getting a nomination or winning an election despite not having being acceptable to the majority of voters in that particular race. The mechanics of this would be similar but a little simplified from ranked choice voting, which our neighbors in Maine, some other states have tried, where you start knocking candidates off the ballot as you go along. This would just say there's one vote, you can vote for as many as you want, and whoever gets the most votes moves on to the general or wins the race. If you have questions, I would recommend addressing them to Senator Innes and those people behind me. I can write them down and make sure you get an answer. Thank you.
Questions from the senators? A question that you can pass on to Senator Innes is, how do I fulfill the constitutional requirement to announce the vote at the end of the day? Seems to me that we've ended up with a situation where that it would not be possible unless we did have the voting machines done that way, but even in the small areas, if they don't choose to have a voting machine, I don't believe it's possible to complete the count and announce the results per the Constitution the same night.
So your question is
pass that on to Senator Innes, I'd appreciate it.
just to make sure I've got it right, your question is you anticipate this would result in many more total votes being cast and thus take a lot longer to tally, or that we would have to be incompatible with the voting machines?
You know, my 5 votes count more than your 5 people who come in and vote. Again, unless we're talking fractional votes or something, which, ranked choice voting is not a fractional vote, but it is, ranked so that only if this person has to drop out. I just see lots of problems in fulfilling the constitutional requirement of announcing the vote at the end of the election.
I will pass that question on.
That's what I'd like to pass on to Senator Innes. All right, any other questions? Thank you very much. Max, you're back up.
Back for more.
Turn your mic on and introduce yourself.
Max Abramson, former member of the House, and I have
Any written testimony you can provide to her afterward. Just so everyone knows, written testimony, there is a shared drive that the senators have access to, so that it's all put up there, and then that is used to put the stuff into the file at the end.
Am I one short? I'll give you another one.
That's all right, there's plenty of time to,
I can copy it.
here, give that to.
I've got 2 more
senators
copies
that
right there.
You can,
Okay.
well, you, it's easier for you to remember to give it to me than it is for,
So I'm Max Abramson, former member of the House. I did introduce a similar bill a few years ago, and the House election law had a number of questions about it at that time. Actually, the question that you asked, Mr. Chair, the other alternative voting systems like instant runoff voting, ranked choice voting, score, star, those all do have that problem unless you introduce either new machines or update the software on those machines. Full disclaimer, I am a candidate for Congress in CD1, so in the chance that I become the nominee, I would pick up a few votes in November, probably less than 0.5% if this were passed. So at the end of the day, when votes are tallied, the existing machines just go through and add up the total tally, and they produce a receipt. With approval voting, the only thing that's different is the ballot doesn't get tossed out. Since each voter owns their ballot, they have the right to mark their preferences they choose and have those votes be counted. They're counted in the same way as they are with first past the post. Approval voting just prevents ballots from being thrown away. If someone marked one too many candidates on their ballot, this used to be the law of the land and was a custom. Voters were allowed, for example, to vote for both Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln in the four-way presidential race. That was changed, I believe, at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. This bill, if enacted, would make hand recounts easier if a hand recount came up, since many ballots right now are rejected when someone accidentally marks one too many ovals. Printed ballots would look almost exactly the same as they do now, but voters could support none, 1, 2, 3, or all 5 candidates if you had 5 candidates running for 5 seats for school board or planning board or for a multi-member district. Currently, they can vote for none, 1, or 2 candidates. Any more than that, even an accidental vote or an accidental dot results in their ballot being rejected and their vote not being counted. Alternative voting also reduces the opportunity and danger for a single third party or independent candidate pulling votes from one party, possibly causing several incumbents in a multi-member district to lose their seat, even though they may have the support of the public. So if you had, for example, 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and just one independent or third-party spoiler candidate right now, and this does happen, and this happened in a multi-member district recently, which was an 8-way race. Several incumbents can lose their seats because a couple thousand voters move over and support that deliberate spoiler. Approval voting prevents that kind of abuse and also resists tactical voting. Since federal races are often 3- and 4-way, it discourages negative and dishonest campaigning, which a lot of money gets spent on those. In our first-in-the-nation primary, approval voting would also encourage more retail politics, since people wouldn't lose their vote by supporting, say, Fred Karger or some other individual candidate who comes up to New Hampshire and shakes hands and asks for their vote. They could still vote for their favorite big-name candidate and then also Fred or whomever the lesser-known, less-covered candidate is. Approval voting uses the same portrait ballot that Granite Staters are accustomed to and doesn't require any new machines, new software, new ballots, additional pages. By contrast, ranked choice voting, runoff voting, score, and the others that I've mentioned do require a larger investment, and they result in more pages and more complex ballots that a lot of voters are not accustomed to and most have never seen before. Not that I'm speaking against ranked choice voting, but it would not be compatible with a lot of our multi-member districts and multi-way races. Even some of our school board races, it wouldn't work for those. Finally, if a candidate drops out, dies, gets indicted, becomes senile, is removed from the state ballot by the courts or a Secretary of State's office or other official, voters could turn to a third party or independent candidate as a backup candidate. This method of voting has been used for several years already in Fargo, North Dakota, and also St. Louis, Missouri, and it has not only not confused voters, as some of the critics have said, but they've rejected in Fargo multiple attempts to repeal approval voting. House election law's previous concerns were that they wanted to see this law in effect somewhere else before passing it here. And the second listed concern was that they didn't know how the winner would be figured out. Obviously, it's the top vote getter who wins. If this bill is enacted, it would take effect for the September primary, although I'm aware that there's a bill in place that would try to move the state primary up to June, but I think that August is probably more practical. Not to speak on another bill, but an August date, primary date, wouldn't mess up the rest of the calendar. So I'm asking members to support the bill. I think that this is not only unimportant bill, but I think that this is the most important election law bill, and the fact that something like 65 to 70% of voters in the last attempt to repeal approval voting in Fargo said, no, we want to keep approval voting. And the fact that it works so well, doesn't require any new machines, new software, and the fact that it makes recounts not only easier but probably more accurate, since you don't have so many ballots being rejected. I think that this is ready for prime time now, and that we should approve this, not to use a pun, and pass it on to the House.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you. Anyone who didn't sign up but wants to speak? With that, I'll close the public hearing.
Microphone off?
Is there any bills that anybody wants to go into executive session for? Seeing none, I think our business today being complete, we are adjourned.